So, the first question is, why do some people have trauma and others don't?
This is a question I get a lot, so I'm thoroughly prepared. So, in relation to the trauma space, it's interesting because a lot of people, the word trauma gets used a lot. Okay, it's been used a lot more. And when you're looking at like trauma research, the word that they use is PTE, potentially traumatic event, because most people don't realize that just because something traumatic happens does not mean you get trauma. It's not a guarantee, right? So, to say something is traumatic, like broad sweeping, is a misnomer. Saying it is a potentially traumatic event is more true. 2/3 of people that go through a potentially traumatic event build resilience, and it doesn't actually affect them in a traumatic way. It's the 1/3 of people that develop have something that happens that becomes traumatic, like PTSD or complex PTSD. So just big picture, like understanding of like a PTE, which is a potentially traumatic event, versus just calling everything that is traumatic, or that's giving me trauma, or that like PTE, potentially traumatic event. Okay. In relation to why some people get trauma, develop trauma after a potentially traumatic event versus others don't, I like to think about it like the 3 E's: event, experience, and effect. So there's the event. Okay, so I like to use a house fire because it's a really easy way to thing for someone to understand. But the event could be the house fire. The experience, if your house is on fire, the experience of that house fire is potentially traumatic because all of your stuff is burning. You got to run around, find your kids. You got to make sure that you grab as many personal belongings to call the fire department, and you're running around freaking out. Okay, that could be potentially traumatic, and that's how that experience could be perceived by the person whose house is on fire. So then the effect of that event could be PTSD, anxiety long term, or trauma, right? As someone would term it. However, okay, that's for the person whose house is on fire. Okay, same event, but let's pretend now you're the firefighter. Okay, same house fire. It's the same event, but you're a firefighter. Okay, so your experience of that is this is your third house fire of the night. Okay, this is your 300th in your career. Okay, your experience of this house fire is completely different than the person whose house is on fire. Okay, so the effect of that could be resilience. Okay, this is practice. You're learning a new thing. This is like another notch in the belt of house fires that you've helped put out and people you've helped save. And so, same event, completely different experience, and completely different effect on both of those people. And that the experience piece in the middle is based on how our brains perceive objective reality. Okay, so again, objective reality is what happened, which is the house fire. That's the event. The subjective reality is the meaning we make in our own brains. Okay, each of us has 1,000 trillion, that's a quadrillion synapses in each of our brains between our ears. 2 quadrillion between you and I, David. That's wild. Okay, so each of us makes subjective reality differently, and I literally mean makes subjective reality differently because your past experiences, your values, and your beliefs shape how you perceive reality, your subjective reality. Okay, and so that's the reason why. Who knows how someone is going to be affected by a potentially traumatic event? It's hard to tell at the current moment right now. We have to be able to map every single one of your neurons and synapses, which at the current moment is not possible. And it's hard. We'll get there eventually. I very much believe that, but it's hard to predict. And that's why some people have these potentially traumatic events that turn into trauma, and other people, like the firefighter, it builds resilience and it builds strength and it builds it's empowering is maybe not the right word, but resilience is a better word. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and that's something that I think about a lot with different situations. For example, if you have two people, one person grew up in an abusive household and they
Mm.
then become abusive because that's what they know, and then another person that grows up in an abusive household that says, I am gonna make it my life's mission to never be abusive, like, being abused like I was. So it's the same starting situation with two different outcomes. And I find it interesting how people can, through life and what experiences they had and what kind of mentorship they had, how they take that trauma and build themselves from it. And of course, I'm not a PhD like you are, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's just, I find it very interesting to see how people's life paths can take them from the same start.
100%. Yeah, I find it fascinating as well. And
Yeah.
you're on the right track. I completely agree. And it's been studied over and over and over again, even with twins that have similar, like the twins, they're identical, but they have completely different life paths that they go down based on one potentially traumatic event. So it's really interesting. And it's based on protective mechanisms that pop up, which we can talk more about. But it is very interesting, I will say.
Mm-hmm. So, from your practice and the people you've spoken to, how do you say to a person, you have trauma, and how do you measure that?
Great question. So there's a couple ways. In relation to like telling someone they have trauma, the type of psychotherapy I'm trained in is called internal family systems, and it doesn't pathologize these types of things. So it doesn't say David has trauma. It doesn't say David is anxious, right? It would say the way I would frame it is a part of David or a part of Cody is anxious, or a part of Cody is depressed, or a part of Cody is traumatized. And that's so it's not as pathological as like you have trauma. You, my friend, have trauma, right? So I wouldn't necessarily go directly on the nose with that as often as you would think. For people, I work with people a lot of the times after abusive relationships. They've had traumatic childhoods in some way. So it's obviously childhood trauma is the precursor to almost everything. But in adulthood, a lot of the times I'm working with people after abusive relationships. And abusive relationships are a specific type of trauma called complex trauma, which is prolonged, there's complex PTSD and PTSD, and they're kind of different or whatever. And so sometimes people in those situations continue to get labeled with, you have anxiety disorder, you have depression, you have BPD, you have you're struggling with reactive abuse, you have PTSD or whatever, and they get these labels from other people, and then they come to me, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about this. I think that you have complex PTSD, which is a combination of almost all of the things that you've been labeled as, but I wouldn't label them as anything. I would help them understand that complex PTSD, which is a thing, is made of many different parts. A part of you that doesn't trust other people, a part of you that is anxious, a part of you that's hypervigilant, a part of you that is an empath, a part of you that is avoidant, a part of you that drinks or does drugs or watches porn or binge eats or binge shops. And it's a combination of all of those different parts and their behaviors that create complex trauma or complex PTSD. So for some people, it's really relieving to hear, oh, okay, this thing has a title. This thing has a name. I'm not alone. Like, I got it. This is awesome. I feel like there's now hope. And it gives them hope to understand and intellectualize the complex trauma or the trauma, whatever. For some people, it's kind of demoralizing. They're like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to have this thing. I want it to go away. I don't want to be labeled as this. I don't want to be labeled as that. And so it's a nuanced perspective on whether or not I would tell someone like necessarily like, you have trauma. That's like step one. Step two is how would they know if they actually have trauma or not? It's usually pretty clear. I mean, there's some pretty common like flashbacks. Anxiety is a really, really common one. The like easily like hypervigilance, like, or hyper awareness where you're easily triggered and things like that, are hallmarks of like PTSD and complex PTSD. Your worldview changes drastically, and you are much, much more scared. Maybe you're having panic attacks and things like that. So it's usually you kind of, the person subjectively knows, and I have to ask them questions and learn about what they're experiencing and what subjective reality they're creating to understand what's going on, to decipher whether or not they have trauma or not. That being said, there are ways to measure it. So as well, objectively, without having to get into some of their subjective stuff. Biometric devices like a Whoop device or like an Apple Watch or whatever can measure your sleep, your stress, your strain, your heart rate variability, your blood oxygen, your stress levels, your resting heart rate, all sorts of cool things to kind of decipher differences from baseline. So after a potentially traumatic event, right, if your HRV all of a sudden plummets, let's say you're in the 60s or 70s, and now all of a sudden you're in the 20s and 30s, consistently, right, not just one day, but consistently over a couple of weeks or a month, that could be indicative that your nervous system is struggling with something. Because a lower heart rate variability means that your sympathetic, your fight or flight nervous system is hyperactive. Okay, and that's a huge indicator of potential trauma that your body's going through subconsciously that you might not be aware of yet. That could be some of the work I'm doing with my like AI startup is to help create like a predictive measure. It's not to that place yet, but being able to get to a place where you can start to predict that kind of stuff with biometric data would be cool. We're not exactly there yet. You can see it post-mortem, like afterwards, and stuff, but that would be some of the ways that you can start to measure it and like how to know if you actually have trauma or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah. When you are talking to somebody, do you ever, I mean, I know this is probably going to seem so elementary, but do you
It's
ever
okay.
just go with a 1 to 10 scale, kind of like asking them on a 1 to 10 scale, how anxious are you or how depressed are you? Do you ever go something that basic?
Yeah, there are like a Likert scale type of thing. Like there are basic like measurements that you can use and really, really like sound, like survey type methodologies that you're describing. So yeah, you can absolutely do that. And I do that in my intake forms and things like that to get a base level, like a numeric base level from, again, though, that's self-reported subjective data. Okay. So that's, do with it what you weigh. You can do that. But again, a 10 for you might be a 3 for me. So
Right.
like, because we have different subjective realities that we're perceiving. And so you got to keep that in mind with that type of testing or that type of like statistical or like feedback essentially. But yeah, you can do that.
Okay. So say that I have trauma. How would I go about treating it?
For sure. So there's a couple different methodologies. There's two ways, okay? Top down and bottom up. This comes from neuroscience because there's two ways that your brain processes things, which are like top down, like you think of an orange, right, in your head, right, and you go do that thing, or you think of an action you want to take up here, and then your body goes and does it. And there's also like I see this coffee cup, and I then bottom. That's the bottom. My senses are bringing that in, and then I see it in my head. Top down and bottom up. Easy way to think about it is top down is from your mind to your brain and nervous system to your body, and bottom up is from your body to your brain and nervous system to your mind. Okay, so when you're thinking about trauma and healing trauma, the two big groups of therapy or methodologies to treating trauma are top down and bottom up. Some of the most common and some of the most well studied historically are top-down methodologies, and the most like famous methodology, like cognitive behavioral therapy. Almost everybody's heard of that. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Super, really, really great. Love it to death. It's a top-down methodology, and it is really focused on your feelings, thoughts, and your actions. It's really focused on like how you're distorting reality and updating your subjective reality. And that's a top-down method. It works. It's in your head. Okay, it's in your mind. The problem with trauma specifically, and there's new research, and this is a lot of what I specifically research, is bottom-up methodologies for trauma-focused healing and therapy. Top-down methodologies don't work as well for trauma because what happens with trauma is when something traumatic happens, like let's pretend like this little thing is like trauma and it's in my palm of my hand and I close my hands around this, my hands closed around it is my nervous system. Okay. So when something traumatic happens, your nervous system clamps around it, right? This vulnerable part to isolate it from the rest of your body so that this super traumatic thing doesn't get back out. The panic, the fear, the terror, the horror, the grief, the anguish, the shame, the rejection, the abandonment, whatever this is, the traumatic event, your nervous system clamps around it to keep you safe from it. Okay. So the issue with top-down methodologies is that if you're talking to this, notice how it's closed off. You're just talking to it. I could talk to it. I could change my thoughts about it. I could look at it from a different angle. I could look at it from the back. I could look at it from the back. I can do whatever I want. However, I'm not going to get to the trauma that's on the inside because my nervous system is closed off. Okay. So how do you open up your nervous system? How do you open up? You got to go bottom up. You've got to learn how to teach your body how to regulate itself. The first step that I talk to everybody about is 6 steps. It's like PE teacher stuff here. Okay. Doing something to reduce stress and calm your mind every single day, right? Some type of mindfulness, something that helps you reduce stress in your life. Exercise, sleep, nutrition, social connection, and play. Those 6 things, right, start to open up your nervous system a little bit and start to help it feel a little bit safe, a little bit more safe to open up. Then you have to start to create internal and external safety. Okay. If you are still in a traumatic situation, okay, if you're still in an abusive relationship or you are still at war, your nervous system is not going to open up because it can't, because its external environment is dangerous. So it's not going to open up. Okay. And so you've got to create some external safety, number one. And that is getting around healthier people, places, and things. Okay. Removing bad, negative people, places, and things that keep your nervous system clamped up. People that crush your boundaries, people that take advantage of you, people that manipulate you, like places that drain your energy, things that distract you from what you're really on earth to do, right? Removing those, that starts to open up your nervous system a little bit more. And all this is bottom up, okay? Working with just helping your nervous system open up. And then internal safety is starting to feel a felt sense of safety internally. Healing trauma is scary because as you're opening this back up, this thing is starting to come back out, okay? And it's starting to get released back into your body. And so as you're opening up, you've got to start to teach your nervous system what it's like to feel open again, to feel expanded, to feel joy, to feel happiness again. And you have to also teach it how to handle and regulate through the big emotions that come up as you're healing these traumatic events, these traumatic things. And so when you're working bottom up, like internal family systems, like I'm trained in, you're working bottom up, right? And it's how your nervous system works. Okay. And so once you open up your nervous system, now this thing is out, you can go talk to this vulnerable, traumatized part of you, right? So if we bring it full circle, this is a part of you that got traumatized. It is not you. So you don't have to go re-experience that traumatic memory. I, Cody, can witness and say, oh, you're hurt. You are struggling. You need help. Okay. I don't have to go and re-experience the memory to heal the trauma, right? Top-down therapies, a lot of the times people come to me after they've gone to some talk therapist that re-traumatize them because like, yeah, let's just go right back to the memory. Let's put you right back in the thing and traumatize you. Like, dude, what? Why would you do that? You don't have to do that to heal trauma. And so that's the process of like, how do you treat trauma or whatever? That's a big piece of going bottom up and then top down. And that's the beautiful part. You've got to go bottom up to open up the nervous system and start to figure out what is that vulnerable part? What is the trauma? And then go top down to start to get to know that part and heal that part and take this part from inside this traumatic event. You can pull it out and rescue it and save that traumatized part and release it. So now it can be a healthy part of your body, a healthy part of your psyche, really, in your mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good analogy with your hands, opening up and like that. One question that I have is when you're helping people and you see their nervous system, start to kind of open up. Do you ever have people that get scared and kind of close up again?
100%. Most common thing that I'm working with people is what you just demonstrated. The opening up, it gets really, really scary, and they're like, nope. Okay, that is trauma therapy. The opening and the closing. It's not just a mystical hallelujah. No. It's absolutely like they'll open like the tiniest amount and clamp, and then a little bit more and then clamp, and then open up and clamp and open, and they're slowly but surely opening and closing to where they're fully expanded and they can release. But that absolutely freaking is the process. People open and close because it's scary. Because what's happening is there are 3 states of your nervous system. Like this is super overgeneralized, not super overgeneralized, but there's green, yellow, and red. You can think about it like that. Okay. The green zone is where you're calm, cool, collected. You're open, you're compassionate, and you're relaxed. You're in a parasympathetic state. Then there's the yellow zone, which is your stress zone, your fight or flight zone, which is not bad. A lot of people, again, pathologize fight or flight energy. But you need to go into fight or flight energy to walk up a set of stairs, to go lift weights. Like, you have to activate some of that sympathetic nervous system to survive. It is healthy and normal. So fight or flight is not bad inherently. What is bad is if you are in fight or flight too often, too much, too long, or sorry, too much for too long, or too little for too much too fast, or too little too long. Okay, in that fight or flight state. And so a healthy nervous system goes from that green rest and digest state into, let's just pretend you're going to work out. You go from green up into that yellow as you're working out. Okay, then what happens is you go back down into green and you heal. Right, your muscles grow, your body nourishes, you're resting, you're relaxing. So you go from green to yellow, green to yellow, green to yellow, and you fluctuate between those like a wave. That's healthy and normal, and that's really good. What happens in traumatic situations is that instead of stopping bench pressing or doing the curls, like, imagine you just never stop doing the curls. You just do them perpetually, forever. You never take a break ever. You're just continually doing that. What starts to happen is your muscles start to like tear and get damaged and get hurt. And that's what's happening when you're in that yellow, like, stressed out state constantly, like an abusive relationship or an unsafe childhood. You're constantly being activated and pushed further and further up that yellow zone. And what happens is when you get to the top of this yellow zone, your sympathetic state is your heart rate is increasing, your breathing is shifting, your muscles, you're getting more blood in your muscles. You're in this like stressed, like activated state. But what has to happen so that you literally don't die, your heart doesn't explode, is there has to be an upper limit to how sympathetic you could get. Okay. And at that point, your parasympathetic nervous system pulls this lever. And it's like this fail safe that says, okay, we're going to shut Cody down. We're going to shut David down, and we're going to put him in a freeze response. And you get up to that red zone where you are so hyperactivated that you actually freeze, and your nervous system shifts from this hyperactivated, angry, irritated, anxious, worried, concerned, scared zone to a completely shut down zone where you're completely drained of energy. You feel hopeless. You feel helpless. You're preparing. It feels like you're preparing for death. It could look like depression. You're tired no matter how much you sleep, and you're in this freeze zone. And that is your nervous system saying, yeah, you got so activated that we just had to pull this lever so your heart doesn't explode and you don't die. So we're going to freeze you. And so you get up into that red zone. And so then people eventually go from when you're doing this, what's happening is because they're so activated in that red zone, is as I start to work with them, they're in that red zone. Okay. And they have to come down, but you don't just mystically jump from red to green. You have to go back through yellow. That's how your nervous system works. And that is where the clamping comes. Okay. That's where you have to beat the fear of fear, because I'm working with them in that freeze, that red zone. And what's happening when they get to me is they're going from that red zone, they get down into that yellow zone. But what is that yellow zone? It is the stress state. Okay. Anxiety, stress, depression, anxiety, fear, terror, horror, anger, frustration, irritation, really sympathetic feelings. And so they're like, holy crap, I started meditating, I'm eating better, and all of a sudden I thought I was healing, but now I'm feeling more anxious. What's happening? And they misunderstand what their body is telling them. What's actually happening is their nervous system is coming back online, but they are perceiving it as anxiety. So they get freaked out. And so they're opening it up and they're like, oh my God, I thought I was getting better, but they're starting to feel anxiety because they're going back into that yellow zone. Their nervous system is coming back online and they perceive it as something bad. So they clamp down, like you were describing. Okay. And so you've got to teach them that this is good. This is good. You've got to beat the fear of fear, right? You've got to get through that anxiety. You got to get through that yellow zone to get back down to green, right? This is a sign of your healing if you're starting to feel that way. And so that's what's starting to happen. And that's why they clamp back down. And when people don't get help, what happens is they try their entire lives to get better and get better and get better. But what they end up doing, if they don't get explained what I'm explaining now, is they go from yellow to red, yellow to red, yellow to red, yellow to red, and they stay in that cycle, never truly getting back down to green and getting into a healthy place, right? They stay stuck in that yellow-red pattern, and they continue to open up and clamp instead of ever opening up, fully expanding, releasing the trauma, and opening the nervous system in a healthy way again. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You're really good at explaining these things, and oddly enough, even just the motions of your hands really, I mean, for me, they really help me to understand what you're talking about. And of course, you can't see thoughts, and you can't, but this helps me a lot, and I hope for the viewer that helps you too. But yeah, you're really good at explaining these things. So how do you prevent trauma?
That's a great question. So some things are, like we were talking about this earlier. There was a potentially traumatic event here in Kansas City at the Super Bowl parade. There was like a shooting or whatever. Some of those types of things, like I mentioned, when you are in an event like that, a natural disaster or something that you just don't have control over, you can't prevent that piece of it. Okay, the potentially traumatic event, you can't prevent that. How resilient your nervous system is, you have a lot more control over that. And so building resilience in your nervous system is huge. Okay, so the areas that I mentioned earlier are some of the best ways that you can start to process you can pat your stats, if you will, in relation to preventing trauma, right? It's almost impossible to with absolute certainty say that this will help you prevent any trauma ever. Okay, but having healthy habits and routines in your life is so profound, right? Being able to do something that reduces stress consistently, that's super helpful. Doing something that your exercise, your sleep, nutrition, those base level things are super, super helpful. The other thing that's helpful is a lot of times people will think that, okay, you have something called a window of tolerance, which is how much stress you can handle before it gets to be too much. And this window of tolerance grows, shifts, and changes. With it can expand and it can shrink. Okay, so if you imagine when you're going, if you've ever been bowling, you've got the bumpers. It's kind of like that. Okay, and so if you've got those bumpers up and you're bowling, right? In your life, there are stressful things that you can do. Okay, you can put yourself in slightly stressful situations, cold plunges, saunas, going and doing like public speaking even. You're putting your nervous system in a stressful state, if you will, in what a potentially traumatic situation. Okay, and what you're doing in that situation is you're actually expanding your window of tolerance. You're expanding the amount of sympathetic activation that you can handle. And where people get in trouble sometimes with this, from my humble perspective, is that they try to remove as many potentially traumatic things as they possibly can, and they shrink down their window of tolerance because your window of tolerance is like a muscle. If you don't hit the upper limits of it, it shrinks down. Okay, so your window of tolerance gets smaller. So something super, super simple gets shrunk down, right? So you see this special forces guys, think of David Goggins. Almost everybody knows he's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going on? He can be calm, cool. He literally gets helicoptered and dropped into the middle of wildfires on his off days. He does that on his off days. And he's calm, cool, collected in those fires because why? He's expanded his window of tolerance super wide. So there's a lot of stress that he can handle before it gets to a place that's overwhelming for his nervous system, because his nervous system is like a muscle. There are other people who never put themselves in these situations. They isolate themselves. They don't get out. They don't try new things. They don't stress themselves ever at all, to create this perfect bubble, which can be helpful, especially as you're trying to heal. However, ultimately, long term, what's happening is their window of tolerance is getting smaller and smaller. So any amount of stress will put them past what they can handle. And so that being in that hyperactivated state is what your window of tolerance is smaller, and you get activated, and your nervous system gets to a place that you can't handle it. That's where you get to that hopeless, helpless, scary feeling of holy shit. And there's a higher likelihood or a higher chance potentially of you getting traumatized by a potentially traumatic event. And so being able to expand that window of tolerance with healthy stress that you can recover from, is a really great way of patting your stats a little bit and maintaining the healthy habits, patterns, and routines that I already have articulated in relation to just making sure that your body is healthy enough as well. Because there's a difference between fake, that's I don't want to get in trouble here, but fake anxiety and real anxiety. Fake anxiety, all feelings and emotions and things that are valid for sure. But what I'm describing as fake anxiety is when you don't sleep for 3 days in a row and you're feeling anxiousness. That is your body budget, right? Your body telling you, I'm depleted on sleep. And that's the anxious feeling. Or if you're eating crappy, or you're not working out and you're not expending energy, and that energy is just being trapped in your body, right? That is fake anxiety, right? That's a body budget issue, not like not the same thing as like anxiety in relation to like trauma, where you're hypervigilant because the last time you were in a crowd, there was a mass shooting, right? Very, very realistic, and understand it makes complete sense that that would make you anxious. Completely get that. And that's not necessarily a body budget thing. That's more like from a potentially traumatic event. So that's how you would prevent it, or at least stack the deck in your favor in relation to preventing it, if you will. But even
Okay.
special forces guys get PTSD. Even for like first responders who have wide windows of tolerance still get PTSD and things like that as well. So I can't tell you with absolute certainty if do this and you'll never get traumatized. We're just not there yet, like scientifically. I want to get there one day, but and who's to say that? The other thing too is like, do we want to prevent trauma? Okay, there's some argument to be made that post-traumatic growth, right? The growth that you get after something traumatic, almost this gets blown out of proportion because people start to invalidate people who have gone through trauma, and they start to say, oh, it has to mean something, or God, it's God's path, or it was meant to happen, or you'll get stronger because of it. And as you're going through the trauma, that's invalidating and absolutely not helpful. However, what I will say is post-traumatic, right? Post-trauma, if you've done that healing, a lot of the times people will look back and say, yeah, I get it. I understand this. Like I can kind of, I've learned something. I've gotten a little bit better. Like I've grown back stronger because of this thing. That's post-traumatic growth, not during. During, it is far, far better to put your head down and be like, yeah, this sucks. This should not have happened, but it did. This blows. Like, and it's okay to be with those feelings, and not try to explain it as you're going through it, and try to find meaning as you're going through it. Because some things, like my argument is most things, everything is meaningless. We give them meaning. So that's a tangent, but something I just thought of.
No, well said. Very well said. So I just want to touch on your AI company. Can you tell the audience what you're working on?
Yeah, so it's called My Companion, and it's like a trauma therapist in your pocket, if you will, that can help you interface with all of two things. First things first, like bottom line is it can help you with your mental and emotional health, especially if you've been through trauma. And since 87% of every human on earth has experienced one traumatic event in their life, and 93% of people don't know how it's affecting their mental and emotional health, needless to say, most people have gone through something like this and it is affecting their mental and emotional health. So my companion is to help decipher what's going on there and help you work through that. Doesn't mean that you can be perfectly healthy and functional in society, but still have some stuff that you need to work through, or could work through to experience more bliss and happiness and purpose and meaning in your life, and just clear some of the fog. Okay, so it's not just for people who are struggling, but the main function is really to help people who can't find or afford a therapist, because we were 5 million therapists short last year. Okay, so people need help, and we need it asynchronously. So we need services like My Companion that can help people with their mental and emotional health without having to be in front of a human, to at least do some triage. I really believe in my ultimate goal is to get to a place where it is as good as going to a human. Which there's a ton of things that go into that, because human connection is very different. Like there's a lot of energy stuff that gets shifted between us, like neurologically and eye contact and the whole thing. But longer term, that's what I'm looking to do with My Companion. The second piece of it is it aggregates all of your data. And so we have Whoop devices, that biometric devices that we wear. We have Apple Watches. We have social media data. We have there's like weather data and how that could potentially affect your mental and emotional state, which you don't think about, but as a brain scientist, I'm like, okay, there's less sunlight, there's less vitamin D. That means there's probably higher levels of like SAD or like seasonal affective disorder or depression. What could I do, or what could I suggest to someone, right? I know that, right? But you're not thinking about that probably. Most people don't. But My Companion would. And it's collecting and aggregating all of this different data about you and the things that are going on, and helping you make better decisions and help nudge you in the correct direction that will improve your mental and emotional health, so that more people can find happiness and purpose in their life. And that's what the goal of My Companion is to be that trauma therapist and friend in your pocket that can be there to support you, and is also doing all of the back end data integration that none of these other companies are doing at the current moment, because they're just all siloed.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for explaining that just for the people that may be interested in looking into it and buying it. So, Cody, I want to say thank you. Your explanations, like I said, were on point. They're very good, and I I certainly feel like I understand better what you're talking about, especially with your, like I said, with your hand motions. It really helped. Just
Okay.
my opinion. But so, where can people find you on social media, your website, all that kind of stuff before we go?
For sure. Everything is Mind, Brain, Body Lab. Uh, the website is mindbrainbodylab.com. And then every social media platform is at Mind, Brain, Body Lab, for all of my, that's like my main stuff. We also have a wait list for My Companion. If you want to join the wait list, it is just my-companion.app. And that's the wait list. We also have a link to the wait list on our website. So if you go to mindbrainbodylab.com, everything's there. And you can also, you'll find the wait list, you'll find all of our programs and everything. So that's probably the best link to go to is mindbrainbodylab.com. But if you're looking for social media, literally any social media platform, just at mindbrainbodylab.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Just remember to like and turn on that little notification bell so you don't miss any additional content. And we'll see you next time.